Under the dim light of the leasing office, a voice thundered like a storm breaking through the silence. "You people don't build homes, you build traps." A woman stood trembling, her face pale as she clutched a thick folder of housing documents. Tucked beneath them a photo of her 9-year-old son, his eyes still too innocent to understand they were about to lose the only place he had ever called home. Across from her, the manager merely shrugged, cold and indifferent. "You should have read the contract more carefully. We're not responsible if you misunderstood." What none of them realized was that the man quietly sipping free coffee in the corner, thick-rimmed glasses and worn-out boots, was Jackson, CEO of Crestwood Living, one of the largest housing development companies in the country. And, in that moment, he understood. This wasn't just a pushy sales tactic. This was a machine, and he knew someone had to disrupt it. Have you ever signed something you didn't fully understand and ended up paying for it? If so, comment yes and share how much it cost you. If not, comment no, and may you never find yourself in that situation. It was late morning, and the sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement of the parking lot as Jackson Reeves stepped out of a borrowed pickup truck. His jeans were faded and hung loosely off his frame. His flannel shirt was wrinkled, and his boots hadn't seen polish in years, a complete contrast to the tailored suits and glossy Oxfords he wore in the boardroom. Today, he wasn't Jackson Reeves, CEO of Crestwood Living. Today, he was Ray Anderson, a divorced maintenance technician, trying to start over after a string of layoffs and a foreclosure he still hadn't found the courage to tell his family about. He took a long breath, pulled the brim of his baseball hat lower, and walked into the leasing office of Crestwood Fort Worth Villas, the company's premier rent-to-own community in Texas. From the outside, it looked pristine. Modern signage, freshly painted stucco, and a few well-placed potted plants near the entryway. But Jackson wasn't there to admire curb appeal. He was there because of the flood of complaints. Residents who had paid for years with no deed in sight, hidden clauses buried in fine print, eviction notices delivered after a single missed payment, agents who promised homeownership that never arrived. Inside, the lobby gleamed, pumped with icy air conditioning and a vague citrus scent. Photos lined the walls, smiling families, kids playing on manicured lawns, handwritten notes beneath them. "Thank you for giving us our forever home." Jackson felt a lump rise in his throat. A leasing consultant in his early 20s, neatly groomed, Crestwood name tag clipped to his collar, rose from behind the front desk with a smile too polished to be sincere. "Welcome to Fort Worth Villas," he chirped. "I'm Chase, here to browse or looking for a place?" Jackson forced a polite smile. "Just checking the area. Heard this place is good for people starting over." Chase grinned and nodded. "You heard right. This is one of our top spots. We just opened up a few 2-bedroom units. Quiet corner lot, nice views, and best of all, rent to own. Pay monthly, and in a few years, it's yours." Just like that. Jackson raised an eyebrow ever so slightly. Chase chuckled. "Of course there's paperwork, but the whole goal is making homeownership easy. We take pride in that. Want to see the model unit?" Jackson gave a nod. "Sure." As they stepped outside, Chase launched into a well-rehearsed sales pitch. Granite countertops, new appliances, energy-efficient insulation, no hidden fees, everything straightforward and simple. Jackson listened intently, asking the kind of questions any regular prospect would. How much is the down payment? What's the process for title transfer? What happens if someone falls behind by a few weeks? Chase smiled through every answer, repeating phrases like, "Don't worry," and "It's all standard," offering just enough warmth to ease suspicion, but never enough to be clear. There were no legal specifics, no firm commitments, only the vague assurance designed to soothe, not inform. The model home was immaculate, like it had leapt off the pages of a catalog. A bowl of green apples sat perfectly centered on the dining table, and a throw blanket was artfully draped across a cozy armchair. Jackson slowly scanned the room, imagining someone like Lisa Carter, an exhausted nurse coming off a night shift, walking through that door and seeing this place as her future, never knowing the storm that awaited. "Looks solid," Jackson said quietly. "Hold me up our best," Chase nodded. "And this batch won't last. Want to go ahead and apply? No pressure, just to get the ball rolling." Jackson smiled faintly. "That easy, huh? I think I'd like to look over the paperwork first." Chase didn't flinch. "Of course. I'll print a standard lease for you to review." As they walked back to the office, Jackson slipped a hand into his pocket. The old burner phone he'd brought, no apps, no tracking, just voice memos and a basic camera, was ready. He didn't know it yet, but in the next 30 minutes, he'd hear something that would change everything. And it wouldn't come from Chase. It would come from the room next door. Through the frosted glass of the office partitions, Mark Sloan's voice cut through with chilling detachment. His tone was steady, practiced, like he'd delivered this speech dozens of times. "Monthly payments accumulate toward equity credit only if all terms are met," Mark recited. "That includes administrative fees, property taxes, and reassessments." He spoke like reading from a script, as if these terms were standard knowledge, even though no one had ever explained them. Lisa Carter sat across from him. Her eyes were rimmed red but focused, her voice unsteady but firm. "No one told me about reassessments or surprise fees. I've made every payment on time for nearly 4 years. I even picked up holiday shifts at the hospital to pay extra." Mark raised an eyebrow, giving a smirk that hovered between condescension and mock sympathy. "I'm sure you've worked hard," he said, "but hard work doesn't override a signed legal document." Lisa opened her folder and pulled out a crumpled flyer, the one she was handed on her first visit to Fort Worth Villas. It showed a cheerful family smiling in front of a stucco house. Below the photo, bold print read, "Own your home in just 36 months. No surprises, no hidden fees." She laid it on the desk like evidence in court. "This is what I was shown, this is why I moved here." Mark didn't even glance at it. "That's marketing, Miss Carter. It's not part of the contract. The lease terms supersede all promotional materials." Lisa blinked, and her shoulders suddenly drew in, like shrinking under the invisible weight of the truth crashing down. "I sold my car just to make the down payment," she whispered. "I walked to work. I saved every dollar. For my son." A photo slipped from her folder, landing on the desk, a boy, maybe 9 years old, grinning, with 2 front teeth missing. Jackson, listening from the next room, felt his stomach twist. Mark continued, his voice flat. "If you're unable to pay the outstanding administrative and transfer fees, $12,400.00, the deed cannot be transferred. And since you miss the conversion window, the lease remains as is." Lisa looked up sharply. "Missed the deadline? What deadline?" Mark tapped the lease. "Page 19, subsection 4. You were required to submit a conversion intent form within 90 days after completing the 36-month term." Lisa's voice cracked slightly. "I didn't even know that form existed. I signed every page because Doug told me it was all standard. He flipped through everything so fast, I couldn't read it." "Doug Mercer no longer works here," Mark replied with polished ease. "And verbal assurances are not legally binding." Lisa fumbled with her documents, her hands trembling. "So what now?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I lose the house, the money, everything?" "If you want to stay," Mark replied, his tone mechanical, "you'll need to sign a lease renewal at market rate. Otherwise, the property will be reclaimed." Tears brimmed in Lisa's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She stood slowly, picked up the photo of her son, and just before turning away, she spoke in a voice that was strangely calm, almost too calm. "You don't build homes, you build traps." She turned and walked out. Jackson sat frozen. Chase, still at the front desk, chatted on about utility averages, gym access, and community perks, oblivious to the fact that Lisa's world had just collapsed behind a thin pane of frosted glass. "Honestly, I live here too," Chase added with a casual laugh. "Would you mind if I took a few minutes to look this over on my own?" Jackson interjected, standing up. Chase paused, slightly taken aback, then nodded. "Of course. Take your time." As Chase walked away, Jackson moved silently down the hallway toward the water cooler just outside Mark Sloane's office. The phone in his pocket was still recording. He kept his head down, pretending to fumble with a paper cup. Inside, Mark was on the phone. "She's on her way out," he said flatly. "I followed protocol. She doesn't have a leg to stand on." Jackson's jaw tightened. Fury bloomed deep in his chest. This wasn't a clerical error or some unfortunate exception. This was strategy, a designed, repeatable tactic. If no one intervened, there would be more Lisa Carters. Walking in full of hope. Walking out empty. And that was it. Jackson had heard enough. Still gripping the paper cup, he listened as Mark continued. "She claims she didn't know about the form. Doesn't matter. She signed. Not like she can afford a lawyer anyway." There was a pause, then a low, mocking chuckle. "Single mom, hospital worker, it's always the same story. They think paying rent means ownership. We just stick to the lease. If they don't read the fine print, not our problem." Jackson's stomach turned. This wasn't just about Lisa. It was a system built on silence, speed, and the blind trust of people too tired, too hopeful, or too desperate to push back. He looked down into the trembling surface of his water, as if it mirrored the storm building inside him. Then he turned around. Lisa was walking down the narrow hallway, her folder hugged tight to her chest, her eyes cast downward. They nearly collided. "Oh, sorry," Jackson said, catching her elbow as a few papers slipped from her grasp. Lisa's photocopied checks, a crumpled flyer, and on top, that same photo of her son, all smile and missing teeth. Lisa dropped to gather the mess, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I wasn't watching," she mumbled. Jackson crouched beside her, helping collect the scattered pages. No harm done. He caught a glimpse of the lease, handwritten notes in blue ink, her initials on nearly every page, her trust, poured out line by line across 24 pages of calculated entrapment. He stood, handing her the final sheet. Lisa looked up. Their eyes met for the first time. Hers were red but dry, the kind of dry that said she'd run out of tears. "Are you okay?" Jackson asked gently. She hesitated. For a second it looked like she might lie, say she was fine, smile, pretend. But instead she whispered. "No." One word. But it landed like a weight across the room. There was something about her stillness, her quiet, that pierced deeper than any outburst could. "I'm sorry," Jackson said softly. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I'm looking at a place here too. And something about all this feels wrong." Lisa gave a faint, joyless chuckle. "Wrong? That's putting it kindly." She clutched her folder tighter. "I should go." "Wait," Jackson said quickly, steady but calm. "Would you talk with me for a few minutes? Maybe just over a coffee? I'm just trying to understand how this all works, and you seem like someone who's already been through the worst of it." Lisa studied him, wary, exhausted, and slightly curious. "You don't even know me." "I don't," Jackson admitted, "but maybe I can help, or, at the very least, I can listen." Lisa paused, then glanced toward a nearby waiting area, a dusty old coffee machine, 2 tan chairs, and a faded plastic plant basking in years of sun exposure. "All right," she exhaled, "but just for a few minutes." They walked together in silence. Jackson motioned toward the old coffee machine. Coffee? Lisa gave a dry laugh. If you can call it that. They sat, paper cups in hand. The low hum of the AC masked every other sound. So, Jackson began gently. What happened? Lisa took a small sip, then placed the cup down and intertwined her fingers in her lap. Her fingertips toyed with the corner of her folder, restless, nervous energy slipping through every small motion. I moved here 4 years ago, she said quietly. After the pandemic, I lost my old apartment. Rent skyrocketed, but wages stayed the same. I'm an ER nurse, night shifts, weekends, holidays. I needed somewhere close to the hospital and safe for my son. Jackson nodded silently, allowing her the space to continue. I saw an ad for this place, Lisa went on, clutching the cup tightly. Rent to own in 36 months. No hidden fees. It sounded like a real shot. The leasing agent, Doug, he was smooth, knew just what to say. He told me I could treat it like my own home from day one. Her mouth curled bitterly. And I did. I painted, I fixed the plumbing, I treated it like it was already mine. She pulled a flyer from her folder. The same aged one from before, now yellowing at the corners. This was the promise, and I believed it. Jackson took it from her, pretending to read, though he already knew every word. When did you realize something was off? He asked. Lisa let out a heavy breath. 2 months ago, I asked about finalizing the deed. They told me I'd missed a deadline to submit a conversion form. A form no one ever mentioned. And now they want over 12 grand in fees or I lose the unit. Jackson raised an eyebrow. And you never saw that form? Not once, Lisa said firmly, but apparently I initialed it, along with 20 other pages Doug flipped through in under 5 minutes. He told me it was standard. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. Silence stretched between them. Then Lisa whispered, so softly it almost vanished into the hum of the room. I used my son's college savings for the down payment. Every dollar was meant for our future. Jackson clenched his jaw. And now they're threatening to evict you. Lisa didn't answer. She didn't need to. She just looked at him, exhausted, betrayed, but held together by something he couldn't quite name. Maybe resilience. Maybe just the stubborn instinct of a mother who refuses to break. Jackson took a sip of the lukewarm, bitter coffee. It tasted exactly like the promises they'd fed her, cheap, hollow, and unloved. But it bought him a moment to study the woman across from him. Her face had settled into a kind of quiet that only comes after all the tears have run dry. Can I ask you something a little personal? He said. Lisa nodded slowly. Why didn't you push back sooner, when you realized the deed hadn't transferred? She hesitated, then gave a soft shrug. Because I trusted the process. Because I was too busy. Because I thought if I just followed the rules it would all work out, and maybe because I was scared. Scared of what? Of losing the only thing I thought I was building, she said simply. I didn't want to believe I'd been lied to. Jackson nodded, quietly. And today, Lisa continued, sitting in that office, I realized something. This system was never designed to give me ownership. It was built to keep me just long enough to drain everything I had, then swap me out for the next desperate person. She opened the folder again, laying out receipts, repair invoices, a supply list from Home Depot. I fixed the sink, patched the drywall, replaced the water heater. I treated that place like it was mine, because I believed it would be. Jackson leaned in. Do you still have any texts or emails from the agent, the one who promised the 36-month plan? Lisa pulled out her phone and scrolled. Some. He texted more than he emailed, but I took screenshots. And I've got a few appointment confirmations. Not one mention of extra fees or deadlines. Can I take a look? She handed over the phone. Jackson scrolled quickly, just as he expected. promises made outside the contract with no legal weight. But they were the very words that lured Lisa into this web. And now, she hadn't just lost money. She was losing her trust in a system that had claimed it was built to protect her. It wasn't a one-time failure. It was a blueprint, a model crafted with strategic ambiguity, vague optimism, and warm reassurances, designed to hook hearts before minds had time to read the fine print. They walked together in silence, the only sound the soft whir of the ancient coffee machine down the hallway. Jackson motioned to it. "Coffee," he offered. Lisa managed a wry, dry laugh. "If you can call it that." They settled into the creaky waiting area chairs, paper cups in hand. The hume of the air conditioning swallowed up any other noise. "So," Jackson began gently, "tell me, what happened?" Lisa lifted her cup to her lips, took a small sip, then folded her hands in her lap, her fingers tracing the worn edge of her file, betraying the tension she was struggling to contain. "I moved here 4 years ago," she said quietly. "Other the pandemic, I lost my old apartment. Rent went through the roof, but my pay didn't. I'm an ER nurse, night shifts, weekends, holidays. It never stops. I needed somewhere close to the hospital, somewhere safe for my son." Jackson nodded wordlessly, giving her all the space she needed to continue. "I saw an ad for this place," Lisa said, squeezing the cup lightly. "Rent to own in 36 months, no hidden fees." It sounded almost perfect. The leasing agent, Doug, was smooth. You know, the type who can talk his way straight into your trust. He told me I could treat it like my own from day one. She pursed her lips bitterly. And I did. I painted. I fixed the plumbing myself. I treated it like my home. She pulled the original flyer from her folder. It was yellowed at the edges now. "This was the promise," she said, her voice quiet. And I believed it. Jackson took it from her, feigning a careful read, though the words were already burned into his memory. "When did you know something was off?" he asked softly. Lisa exhaled, a long, weighty breath. 2 months ago. I asked about getting the deed. They told me I had missed the deadline to submit a conversion form. Never mentioned it before. And now they're demanding over $12,000 or I lose the unit." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "And you never saw this form?" "Not once," Lisa answered firmly. "But apparently, I initialed it, along with 20 other pages Doug rushed me through in less than 5 minutes. He said it was standard. I wanted to believe him. I needed to." Silence wrapped around them again. Then she spoke so softly it sounded like a confession. "I used my son's college savings for the down payment. Every dollar. For our future." Jackson's jaw tightened. "And now they're threatening to evict you." Lisa did not reply. She didn't need to. The exhaustion, the betrayal, the fierce hold tight to something. Whatever it was, it showed plainly on her face. Resilience? The fierce protective instinct of a mother? Jackson lifted the paper cup, took a careful sip of the lukewarm, bitter coffee. It tasted exactly like the empty promises she'd been sold. Bland, cheap, unlovable. But it gave him time to study her. Her eyes, so weary, had the calm resolve that follows when all tears have already run dry. "May I ask? Something personal," he said gently. Lisa gave a small nod. "Why didn't you push back earlier when you realized the deed hadn't been transferred?" She hesitated, then shrugged, a soft, resigning gesture. "Because I trusted the process. Because I was too busy. I believed that if I followed the rules, everything would work out, and maybe because I was scared." "Scared of what?" he asked. Lisa looked up, her voice low and final. "Scared of losing the only thing I thought I was building. I didn't want to admit I'd been lied to." Jackson nodded with understanding. "And today," she continued, When I sat in that office, I realized it. This system was never designed to give me ownership. It's built to keep me long enough to bleed me dry and then replace me with the next desperate person. She leafed through the folder again and spread out the evidence. Payment receipts, plumbing invoices, even a Home Depot supply list. I fixed the sink. I patched walls. I replaced the water heater. I cared for that place like it belonged to me. Because I thought it would. Jackson leaned forward. Do you still have any texts or emails from Doug, the one who promised you the 36-month plan? Lisa tapped her phone, scrolling. A few? He texted more than he emailed, but I saved screenshots and a couple appointment confirmations. Never a word about any extra fees or deadlines. May I see? He asked. She handed him the phone. Jackson turned it over. As expected, the messages didn't match the contract. No legal enforceability. But they were the words that sealed her hopes. And now, more than money, she'd lost her trust in a system that once promised to protect her. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a masterfully crafted blueprint. A model built on vague hope, strategic ambiguity, and friendly assurances, designed to hook your heart before your eyes hit the fine print. Derek Sloan entered, the older brother of Mark and the franchisee licensed to operate Fort Worth Villas. His polished shoes paused abruptly as he saw Jackson standing his ground. Everything okay in here? He asked with a forced calm. Mark cut in quickly. He's refusing to leave the office. I'm not refusing, Jackson replied evenly. I'm seeking clarification. Your staff is handing out contracts with misleading fee structures and hidden clauses. I've already spoken to a resident who lost tens of thousands based on false promises, and I believe you're aware she's not the only one. Derek forced a tight smile. And you are? Ray Anderson. Jackson responded with a small, pointed smile. Though that's probably not a name you'll remember. Derek's forced politeness broke. If you have no intent to rent, I'll have to ask you to step outside. Fine, Jackson said, rising. Outside then. Bring Jake from reception and Lisa Carter too. We can all have a chat, right here in front of other tenants, about how Crestwood is profiting from this. Derek narrowed his eyes. You're threatening me? Do I look like I'm bluffing? Jackson walked to the glass double doors, sliding them open to the main lobby. A few tenants paused mid-stride. Jake stood near a monitor, visibly pale. Lisa sat in the corner, clutching her folder. Jake! Jackson called clearly, echoing in the still space. Quick question, were staff instructed not to explain the ownership conversion timeline to prospective tenants? Jake, don't say a word. Derek snapped, his voice razor sharp, but it was too late. The trap had sprung. Silence swallowed the room. The hum of printers, keyboard clicks, even the soft background music. Each sound faded against the tension now filling the air. Jake, feet planted near the brochure stand, glanced among Jackson, Derek, and Mark. Lisa stiffened, clutching her papers like a lifeline. Jackson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone was calm and firm. Jake, he said again, were you told to avoid explaining key steps in the ownership conversion process, like the mandatory intent form and hidden fees? Jake swallowed, his face ghostly white. His hands shook. He began, but Derek barked again. Shut it. You're not authorized to discuss internal policies. Jake paused, closed his eyes, and something shifted, a spark of resolve in his expression. No, he murmured, voice shaking but clear. I'm going to speak. Derek stormed forward. You open your mouth and I swear. Fire me then, Jake said louder, the tremor falling from his words. I'm done lying. The atmosphere was electric. Staff peeked out from behind glass partitions. Tenants hesitated, their faces showing reluctant attention. May told us not to go into detail, Jake continued. But they also told us to keep it vague, said the forms would just confuse people, so vague was easier to close. We were instructed to call it a path to ownership, but on paper it's just a lease. We were trained to move fast, get those signatures, especially when someone seemed just a little short on cash or stressed. At that moment, Lisa's chair scraped the floor as she stood. Her voice was strong, not trembling. Her response intentional, precise. Jake nodded, eyes locked on hers. "That's right," Derek bellowed, pointing a trembling finger. "This is slander. You're done, Jake. Clear out your desk." Before he could advance further, Jackson stepped forward, blocking the tension like a wall. "Actually," he said coolly, "no one is going anywhere yet." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a laminated executive badge. Not a police ID, but the crest of Crestwood Living shimmering beside his name. "Jackson Reeves," he stated clearly, "founder and CEO." The reaction was immediate. Mark's face paled behind the glass. Derek recoiled a step. Jake's jaw dropped in stunned recognition. And Lisa? She blinked once, processing that the man she'd just shared coffee with was at the center of this confrontation. "I came here undercover," Jackson continued, voice steady, "because I received dozens of complaints about this location. I wanted to see for myself, not through HR, not filtered through PR. I came here directly." He turned to address everyone in the lobby. "And I've seen enough." A stunned silence followed, broken only by the hum of tension in the air. The time for silence was over. "You can't just," Derek stammered. "I can," Jackson said firmly, "and I did. Crestwood Living built its name on providing stable, ethical housing. What's happening here is the opposite. You've distorted paperwork, exploited the vulnerable, and used the company's name to protect personal gain." At that moment, the front doors opened. 2 uniformed police officers entered the lobby, called earlier by Jackson's legal team. "Mr. Reeves?" one of them asked. "Yes," Jackson nodded, then pointed at Derek. "I'd like you to speak with some residents. I believe they can confirm there's a systemic pattern of contract fraud here." Derek's face turned crimson. "You called the cops on your own franchise?" "I called them," Jackson said coldly, "to deal with people who've used the Crestwood name to defraud others. That name doesn't protect criminals." Lisa stepped forward, her voice steady but carrying the weight of heartbreak. "Told me I'd own my home after 36 months. He gave me a flyer. But the crucial form? Buried on page 19. When I asked, he said I missed the deadline. Now I've lost everything." One officer nodded, taking notes. Jake spoke next. "I have the training documents, the scripts we were given, emails from Mark. I'll testify." Mark finally burst from his office, face flushed. "This circus is over. There's no proof, just people who didn't read what they signed." Jackson raised a hand, stopping the noise. "No proof?" he echoed. He pressed a button on a small remote. A screen near the reception desk lit up. Jackson's phone mirrored wirelessly, showing a folder titled Fort Worth Internal. He opened a file labeled Lisa Carter, recording. The room filled with Mark's voice. "Dinglehurst," she signed. "It's all there. She can't afford a lawyer. Single mom. Classic case." The murmurs spread like wildfire. One officer turned to Mark. "Sir, we'd like to speak with you privately." Mark tried to protest, but before he could, an older man with a cane stepped forward. "They did the same to me. Said I was on the fast track to ownership. I paid for 5 years. Last month, they said my account reset because I refinanced my car loan. My ownership clause was voided." The young woman added, "I lost my claim because I lost my job, even though I kept paying. I checked. My name was never even on the deed." Jackson nodded, turning to Derek, whose confidence had now collapsed into silence. "As of this moment," Jackson said, his voice steel, This location is suspended from operating under the Crestwood name. All lease agreements will be reviewed by our internal ethics team. Any fraudulent terms will be voided immediately." Jake exhaled. A weight lifted from his shoulders. Lisa's eyes widened. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she no longer looked afraid. She looked like someone seeing sunlight after a storm that had lasted too long. And Jackson, no longer in disguise, no longer on the sidelines, stood at the center of it all, unshaken, steady, bearing witness to the truth finally breaking through the silence.